Welcome to the Brain Network podcast. Today I'm talking to Felicity Purvis, a uni student studying a Bachelor of Arts and Drama and a Bachelor of Secondary Education. I had to look down at my notes to get all those words in. Working as a disability support worker and a teacher's aide in a special school. I want to start with some pretentious questions, and then hopefully we'll get like less pretentious as we go on. You've talked to me about using art in the space of disability. What is a disability in your experience and own mind?
So to me, the disabilities people with disability who I have worked with as a support worker and in a special school have all been pretty extreme. So a lot of mobility issues and very severe communication issues. But from my own high school experience, so I went to a mainstream high school, there were also a lot of people with learning disabilities. So for example, ADHD, autism, dyslexia. So it's such a broad sort of spectrum from my experience that I don't think I can really squeeze it into one definition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on who you ask, like as to what they fit in under the umbrella of disability. But I think I would agree that disability is a huge umbrella of so many different facets. So what is art in your own mind?
To me, art is a really wonderful way to a form of self-expression. It is a creative outlet for so many people, and it allows you to work on your confidence and your collaboration. And it's just, so I think it's a really wonderful opportunity for everyone, not just artists, but even just regular people who are looking to or improve their communication, their collaboration, and it's just got so many transferable skills, and I think it's really wonderful.
How did you become a disability support worker?
So it's actually my neighbor was the first person I ever became a support worker for.
Oh, wow.
So my mum was talking to my neighbor, and they're just like, does your daughter want a job? And I'm like, sure. But there are, from my understanding, there's some Facebook groups that you can that connects families looking for support workers. There are also a few apps as well. Yep.
And it's obviously something that you like because you're wanting to use your education experience to go into the disability sector a bit more. How would you describe it to somebody like a young person who is thinking about going into that kind of work, or maybe they're not thinking about going into that kind of work? For you to be somebody who I would assume wasn't thinking about it until the situation that you described. How would you describe it? How would you,
So the first thing I would definitely say is you really do have to have the personality for it. And you have to be willing to really just commit everything to it. In saying that, though, it's such a wonderful and rewarding experience and job. And I came from working at a cafe before I started as a support worker, which I thought, and it was a wonderful job, and I thought I was really lucky. But then I came to support work, and the amount of love and compassion you can give and receive in return is just one of the most rewarding things you can ever really do. And as someone who was always drawn to being an educator, so I worked with classes in high schools, my family business used to run workshops. It was just something that I kind of fell into. But if I was telling someone who wanted or was looking at doing support work, I would definitely just say it is something you have to love, because if you don't love it, you will find it very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that about any job, that if you don't love it, it's going to be challenging. But I guess the difference is that you have an immediate impact on the person that you're caring for.
Yeah,
and to not want that job would be devastating for them, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like, because you have such a direct impact on this person that you're caring for, if you don't love it, they can pick up on that, and it's cheating them out of an experience where they deserve someone who can give them everything.
And how do you feel about the disability sector in terms of disability support work? Like, is there things that we need to change, the disability sector needs to do to support disability support workers more, or get more people into it, get more people trained up or something like that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge for me coming in as a support worker was you don't require any training. And that is for a reason. It's because the disability sector is they are in such a desperate need of support workers, which was great for initially getting a job. But then once you're actually in the job, you're just kind of thrown in the deep end. They say, good luck, off you go. And you really just have to figure it out by yourself. So it's almost having to strike a balance where we can create training that's accessible enough for people to do and want to undertake. But at the same time, we need an easy gateway into becoming a support worker, because if I had to have training to become a support worker, I don't know if I necessarily would have even thought of it as a career, if I actually had to research it. So yeah, it's just, I think the biggest issue is striking the balance between those two things.
Yeah, so supporting people to have the training that they need to be effective at the job, but supporting people through that so that it's not something that turns them off doing it.
Exactly.
Lose the workforce. And you're right about there being a bit of desperation in the sector for workers, and I think it's a bit of a sad state of affairs that has knock-on effects for how we get people into the sector. And I haven't been a disability support worker, but I have worked in the aged care sector, which I would acknowledge is very different, but has a similar issue of retaining and recruiting staff. And so we've all heard horror stories about nursing homes, and that comes from difficulties getting people into the sector. And ultimately, in the case of the aged care sector, a lack of regulation allows for that to happen in the first place. And is that something, if you didn't have the option of doing all these wonderful things in the education sector that you're going to be doing, would you think about doing disability support work forever, I guess?
It's definitely something I've given a lot of thought to, just because even just financially, I'm earning a very similar amount now to what I will as a first year out teacher. So there is a lot of money going to support workers in order to encourage people to enter the field more. The reason I personally am choosing to finish my degree and potentially go further into the education sector rather than disability support is because it is such a physically and emotionally intensive job. And I think it would be wonderful, and I plan on continuing to do it while I'm still young. But as I get older, I don't think I could do the job justice as I got later on into my career.
As a person who does physical work or has a physical component to their job, I have always had in the back of my mind that there will need to be an escape plan in terms of other kinds of work that I can do when I can't do physical work for whatever reason, whether it's coming across an injury or aging into an inability to do that. And
exactly.
It's such a important thing that you raise, the physical but also emotional component of the job. For you to do that effectively, you need that to be supported and nourished. What stuff is out there for you at the moment, and do you think Like, what changes would you like to see?
So because I do my support work independently, there really aren't that many resources to rely on for the emotional support that kind of comes with support work. So a lot of our emotional support comes from the parents of the girl I care for and also the other support workers, and sharing those experiences with each other. And just your own support network, so like your family, your friends. But in terms of like formalized support services, there aren't that many or that I know of for independent support workers, and I can't speak on what it's like as in an agency. But yeah, in terms of what it's like as an independent worker, there really aren't that many emotional support networks in place for the workers.
And I would imagine that contributes to burnout and things like that. Could certainly do that.
I've definitely gotten to places where like in school holidays, for example, where you're sort of required to be at her house every day, where it is very tiring and very draining, and you do need to step back for a little bit and just recuperate, just because it is such intensive work.
And your work as a teacher's aide in the special school, how's that? What does that involve?
So I'm working with the junior school, so I work with kids from age 3 to about age 12, and there are classes of about 5 to 8 students, which, coming from someone who, I was in a mainstream school, I think I mentioned that earlier, when I went through school, I didn't encounter many people with severe disabilities pretty much ever. And also, even from my support work, I had only ever worked one-on-one with a kid. I had never had to work with a group of disabled people before. So going into a school, like a special school environment, was a very big shock to me. I love it. And it is, again, it's such an incredible and rewarding job. But the initial shock to it was quite intense for me, because there are these kids, they can't talk and they can't move, and they are such gorgeous kids. They have such beautiful personalities, but it's very hard to find a connection with the kids sometimes, just because they can't reciprocate physical touch, and sometimes you don't even want to touch them because you don't know, are they consenting to it? Do they even like this? So finding ways where you can try and connect with a child who can't really show you any sort of emotion besides just using their eyes, it's quite difficult.
A very different context for making connections and for communication. In that environment. Some people in the disability community, I'm going to employ the very convenient some people, want to see an end to special school systems and more of a inclusive system that would possibly look something like having extra supports for some or all of the children in the special school sector to be in a mainstream setting with some additional support. I know that might be a bit of an unfair question to ask you about how you feel about special schools, given that you're working at one. But how do you feel about that sort of thing?
It's definitely something I've thought about, and I think it is a very important step for education to bring kids from special schools into mainstream schools, even if initially it's just coming in one day a week to a mainstream school, just to sort of begin to bridge the gap between mainstream and special schools. Because in a special school, these kids are in a very accessible environment, surrounded by people who really know and understand the kids and who really want to help these kids, which teaches these kids to function in that very accessible and nurturing environment. But when you put them out into the real world, they're surrounded by people who don't understand them in the same way, and it becomes quite overwhelming. And I've seen that through my support work, that sometimes it's just hard for them to function. They don't know how to communicate. They don't understand how to communicate as able-bodied people would deem socially acceptable. And that can be quite difficult. But on the flip side of that, as someone who came through a mainstream school, I never encountered people with these extreme disabilities, and which is why it was so shocking for me when I first started working as a support worker and in a special school, because it was just something I wasn't familiar with. So in both ways, bridging the gap between special schools and mainstream schools would really allow all kids to become more comfortable with each other and more accepting of each other, and more adapting to how everyone needs to communicate.
Certainly mainstream schools that I've encountered would need to have adaptations to become appropriately
100%,
accessible.
yes.
But we need to have a sort of social shift in terms of how we engage with people with disabilities, to be a little bit more accepting of bodily difference and communication differences, for example, so that, like you were saying, when you were growing up, it was a shock because you hadn't seen that. So I think facilitating that to be not a shock is part of this bigger picture where society as a whole changes its relationship to the disability community.
100%.
What sort of stuff do we need to do to get that happening? Like, what can ordinary people do?
I think, as in the world that we live in right now, it is very hard for able-bodied people to adapt to people with disability, just because we've never had to. And there's no one that I've ever encountered who has ever really pushed for it. So I think the first step in becoming a more inclusive society is really just including people with disability. And I think there are some really wonderful organizations who do this. Like, there is a camp that's based out at Samford called Camp Agoonery, and it is a scout camp where people from special schools can go for a week, and it is a blend of mainstream school kids and special school kids, and they live together for a week. And I think when I first heard of that, I thought that was such a wonderful idea, because it just gives these kids an opportunity to mix with each other and take away that element of fear from both sort of parties. So I think the first step in becoming more inclusive is simply just including so much, like, people from all different walks of life.
Giving that opportunity for that engagement to happen in the first place. It sounds like a really awesome program, the one that you've just mentioned. I didn't know that we were doing that kind of thing. So that sounds fantastic, and that sounds to me like, the first step in terms of getting these kids in, like you're saying, maybe even one day a week to start with, just to have access to what mainstream schools may be offering that they could benefit from, the special school students, and to be in that environment with the other kids, perhaps, that can be accepting of them because they've had that exposure in that sort of scout camp environment. Sounds awesome. So it's great to hear that sort of stuff is is going on.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Tell me a bit about what's happening in your work where you're using art with these.
Yeah. So from since I've been working in the special school, so only for the past few months, the biggest things that I picked up on that these teachers want to work on with the students is communication, independence, collaboration, emotion regulation, and fine and gross motor skills. So in the arts allows people to tap into that in a lot of different disciplines. So for example, music, you can really work on your fine motor skills. You can work on your like body awareness. Same with drama, you can work on your body awareness, your collaboration. So in terms of arts and disability, I think there's a lot of crossover between what the arts has to offer and what the main goals, from my understanding, is for people with disability.
Okay, so it's just alternate ways of expressing, like emotional expression, and then some technical skill stuff too, with articulating different instruments and all that sort of thing. Is that part of it too?
Not even necessarily different instruments. So a big thing that we do in the school is body percussion. Say for example, there'll be a song that comes on and you'll have to keep the beat, but it'll name different body parts you have to tap. So like tap your nose, you'll have to keep your beat while tapping your nose. It'll change, tap your chin. So it's really seamlessly linking education, for example, in this case, anatomy, with this rhythmic skill that is in music, while building your body, like awareness of your own body. And so for example, in visual art, one thing I work on with the girl I care for is independence through her art. Because she signs, it's very difficult for her to sort of do anything that uses her hands, because she loses her ability to communicate.
Okay.
As soon as she starts doing something that requires her hands, so which is challenging in so many different ways. So one thing that I'm trying to work on with her is using visual art as a way where she can use different color to express her emotions, so she can still communicate how she's feeling, even if she can't sign or communicate how she's used to. She can use different lines to express her emotions. She can use shape. So I think, there's a lot of power in the arts to make communication and physical development very accessible and create really sort of achievable goals depending on the person that you're working with.
Yeah, the stuff that you're talking about does sound very empowering, the way that you describe it. So you've talked about music and fine arts. Do you have a preference for one over the other? Is there other stuff going on as well?
Oh, mate, I could talk about this all day. So I major in drama, so I'm kind of always leaning towards drama, just because I think it encompasses so many different aspects of the other disciplines of art. So it allows you to incorporate music and rhythm. It allows you to incorporate visual art through set design, and what are the other arts? Dance, through movement. So in terms of, if I were to focus on one sort of art with the disabled community, it would be drama, just because it allows you to incorporate so many different layers and disciplines.
I've never thought about that before. As much as I love art, I've never thought about how drama incorporates so many.
And it's something I didn't really realize until I started my degree, because I came from high school and I was like, I'm such a great artist, you know what I mean? But then I came into my degree and there were so many talented people who were really talented at their specific discipline, where I found drama was just kind of a clumsy mishmash of all the others. So all these other artists, they were so skilled at their one discipline, whereas the skilled drama people were just very average at a lot of disciplines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, that does. Yeah.
And that's something I feel like I can say as an art student. So no offense to anyone doing drama.
Yeah. No, and there's nothing wrong with being like, because you're not necessarily even a jack of all trades, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because you're using all of this knowledge in a particular way, and that's so it makes you a very adaptable and useful to so many avenues of art, and you can become a specialist in one later, if not a specialist in drama. I don't know. So what about the shy kids, or I'm just thinking about myself. Like, I would never do drama as a kid. Like, no way.
No, 100%. And I think that's pretty common as well. And it's something I've talked to my tutors a lot about in my education subjects, is how do you engage shy kids with arts? And I think one of the biggest things we learned is just making little steps, baby steps every lesson. And whether that's by, okay, this lesson you can sit out and just watch, and if you feel comfortable, you can come and join us. Whereas the next lesson, you might get them to read part of a script, just sitting in a circle, or you might include them in a drama game. And it's just slowly building the confidence. And I think that's one of the really powerful things about the arts, is it allows kids to really slowly build their skills, but in a really sort of tangible way. So you can see yourself from if you watch one performance to the next, you can see how you've grown as a performer. Or from one lesson to the next, you can see how your knowledge has been built through the product that you can create from each lesson.
Yeah. Awesome. I love the new way that I'm thinking about drama as a concept in education now. It's blown my mind. And we're impacting how these students are communicating, how they're expressing themselves and working with their emotion. Is there, like, I can think of like way less exciting things, like the way you're describing music is something that I could think about, how we could teach maths, because music is so mathsy.
100%.
Are you doing that sort of stuff, or are you just doing stuff that's like way cooler than that? Because that was the first thing.
So it's not something that I've really had much experience in, but I have seen it done where music is used to teach at least basic mathematics, whether it be through building a bar. So say there are 4 beats in a bar, and then you have your, I don't even remember the music notes names, your semi-breeds, your tars, your TTs. And building your addition skills through that, or your fraction skills through music. And I think it is something that there is a lot of room for growth in, is in bringing the arts to STEM. And because I think the skills from the arts that you gain are so transferable. Your problem solving skills, your communication skills, like, I think they're just so fundamental in every area of STEM that I don't understand why we haven't moved towards that sort of area yet, but that I have seen a massive push towards bringing the arts into science, maths, technology.
Yeah, I think you need to be expressive and creative to do STEM in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's one of the connections. But also, like, I know as I was a drummer in high school, and I did guitar as well, but like drummers were always like, I was always told you got to be good at maths to do drumming, or like you might not feel like it, but you'll like, it's just because you've got, like, you're the guy that's like keeping the time and all this sort of stuff. And I guess when I think about like particularly music, you're making something abstract not abstract anymore, because music is very real in the sense of like, you're making music, and if you're doing it the way that you're like supposed to, if you're reading sheet music, or if you're keeping time even, then you're doing
I've even seen these devices on like Instagram ads where you'll take the waves from like a tree or just a plant or something, and it'll convert those waves going, like those waves of electricity going through the plant, into music. So I think technology has and arts is really having a kick and making really abstract concepts so tangible, like you said. Yeah.
So what could schools do to bridge the gap between STEM and art, or get more art stuff happening in this big push for STEM?
I think a lot of this, honestly, comes from the teachers, in that a lot of my arts teachers didn't have a bar of STEM. A lot of my STEM teachers didn't have a bar of arts. So I think the first step is trying to encourage more teachers to have that open-mindedness between the two fields and trying to relate them a lot more. And it's something the Queensland Academies, they're at their Science, Maths, Technology campus. It's something that they're working a lot on, and it's something a lot of other schools have started doing, is these hybrid subjects between, say, music and HPE, or visual art and maths, or something like that, to try and encourage this across field thinking and reasoning. But initially I think it does have to start with the people who are teaching the subjects, because ultimately they have the largest influence on what the students can take away.
So what does because this is just me thinking back to my high school experience. What does a hybrid subject look like? It's breaking me to think about what that might look like.
I know, like even when I went through high school, like they only just started introducing sort of hybrid subjects at my school, really sort of when I was graduating, or more this year after I've graduated. So from my understanding of it, it's teaching these 2 or 3 sort of subject areas and trying to condense the subject matter in a way that you can sort of teach them almost at the same time through like their similar sort of principles, and using one subject to enhance the learning of the other. But again, it's not something, like, it kind of boggles my mind as well, because it's also something that I've not really had to experience. But I think going through my teaching degree, I'm just kind of like, what else is going to change by the time I even finish my degree? Like, what am I going to get thrown into by the time I'm actually a qualified teacher? It
sounds like a really cool idea. I just don't I can't imagine it happening. Like, I can see the relationship between maths and physics, and then chemistry and physics, and therefore the relationship.
Well, you were just saying before you saw the relationship between maths and music.
Oh yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Got you there.
So, but like, and then the way you've described drama to me is like you're putting in all of the arts together, I guess. But what are some of the other hybrid stuff that's going on? Like you were talking about HP and.
Yeah. So HP, I think, could be potentially quite one of the easier ones to integrate with the arts, just because it's sort of, especially with drama, it demands so many of the same skills. So in drama, you have to communicate with your fellow actors or your performers. With HPE, you have to communicate with your teammates. With drama, you're working on fine motor skills through your movement. Same with HPE. So I think it's not so much about how is this going to work, it's sort of more opening our minds to the fact that these subjects that we have so separated, like when I was going through school, it was so much a fact, like if you're an art student, you don't do sport, like it's just not something you do. And I think that's quite a traditional sort of idea. But I think the next move for education, again with inclusivity, is opening our minds to the fact that these subjects do not have to be separate, because so many of them demand the same sort of skill set.
Well, I don't want to date myself, but back in my day, we had like the OP system, but everyone forgets about FPs as well, which is your field position. So you have to pick certain subjects that go together in order to for that to impact your OP. And then you had the problem of so like a bad mark in physics is better than a good mark in arts, for example. So a lot of what high school was for me was about preparing you for uni rather than giving you an education. And so that's
yeah.
why your subjects were very rigidly defined and all that sort of stuff, because you weren't really learning for the sake of learning, you're learning for the sake of preparing to
for
go
a
to
uni entry.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was still very much the same when I was going through. So I went through as the Atar system. I was the first year to go through the Atar system in Queensland in a very long time. But again, like the same thing, I was doing specialist maths, which is like the higher level maths, and I was sort of just passing that subject, whereas I was doing really well in my art subjects. But when you actually weighted them, they kind of got brought down to a very similar level, just because I think the society just doesn't see the same value in arts. But if you ask a very sort of science-brained person, they would say, oh, I could never do a drama performance. I could never make myself do that. It's too hard. And I think our world has sort of othered the arts in a way, because they're seen as easy, in quotation marks. But I think that's just because a lot of people are very scared to actually try it, because I think they sort of know deep down that it's really not easy. Like, it's easy to do okay, it's easy to do okay in STEM. But I think in order to really excel at it, it takes a lot more thought and determination.
Yeah. And I think this push for hybrid subjects and different ways of thinking about education is more like, I'm sure it would help you in uni, but it's more about, like, it sounds like to me, it's more about just getting an education for education's sake. At the high school
100%.
level.
Yeah. And I think that is one thing that even the kids in high school are really wanting, because you'll ask any person who's in high school and they say, I don't understand how this is preparing me for the real world. And I think that's why we see so much disengagement in our kids, especially towards the end of their high school, because they're like, I know everything. And this was the attitude I have. I've learned everything I can possibly learn from school, besides like these few formulas for my maths class. But apart from that, every sort of social skill and personal skill that I can learn from high school, I learned 2 years ago. So why am I still here when I could be learning this stuff now in uni? Why are you keeping me back for an extra 2 years when I am ready to go out into the world as an adult?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we're slowly going into a better direction.
I hope
so. Tell me a bit more about the stuff that's happening with all this in mind, new ideas about education, in your application of art for disability students, and maybe like what would be like your plans for the future if you were like running the school and had like the drama program under your control or whatever, like what would be the best arts program for disability students?
So actually this is something I've given a lot of thoughts to, because even when I was deciding my career, I've always wanted to open my own art school for a very long time. But I think it was only since I've started working with disability where I thought this is a very big field, is arts and disability. And everyone I've spoken to, so for example, parents of disabled children, are very excited about the prospect of a more arts focused disability education. And I think that is because the arts, or not even just the arts, but the blending and integration of different subjects together is such a powerful way for children to learn. So even what we were saying before about how HPE and drama have very similar skill sets, by integrating the theory from HPE and drama together. So for example, in HPE, a very big focus is like the physical, like your body and being aware of your body. And I think it's a really great tool for learning that is through something like drama, because again, you have to be so in tune with your body, but you get to use it in such a different way. Or similar to what I was saying before about how we'd sing songs about like placing different, acknowledging different parts of your body through a song. It's such a more engaging way for students to learn, because you require so many different more parts of your brains. that I think it is a very exciting area in bringing a more arts focused or arts integrated education into schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so, like you've just laid out this, so many different values for having it in the first place beyond what we might traditionally think about that art can give us. So just to bring it home, what's the plans for the future for you? You've finished this degree and start your own school or something. Are you thinking about, you're probably not thinking about this at this stage, but are you thinking about postgrad work and research? And
I actually am a little bit, so after I finish my degree, I'm looking at going on and doing a master's in either psychology or occupational therapy. Beyond that though, like in terms of doctorate or anything like that, have not given that any thought. I think 6 years of study ahead of me is enough for my little brain to comprehend. But I think the biggest thing for me is trying to gain as much experience as I can working with different students from so many different walks of life to try and create a really inclusive art school, bridging, taking into consideration what I said about bridging mainstream and special schools. So creating an environment where these kids can work alongside each other, taking the small class sizes from the special schools, because I do think the special school system is like a very beautiful system for students to go through just because it's so individualized. So I think taking the sort of values from a special school, but bringing them into mainstream society, where people can benefit from them, I think is what I'm most excited about for my future career, in trying to develop this arts program in my future.
Yeah, awesome. And what would you do, like if you studied psych or OT? What are they bringing into the equation?
Honestly, they just kind of sounded cool to me. But when I think about it, I think one of my biggest interests, so for example, in occupational therapy, I think seeing these kids in the special school, like designing their wheelchair, like their ultimate wheelchair that can make the world as accessible to them as possible, or designing play spaces. So there's one little girl at my school who has drop seizures. So she had a whole team of OTs who worked together to try and create a safe play space for her. So it had soft floors and soft walls, and trying to create a very nurturing and safe environment for this girl is one of the things that excites me most about occupational therapy. So it's more applied, but with psychology, I have always just been fascinated by the human brain. And if I wasn't doing arts, I would be doing psychology. So I think
fair enough.
I think
so many applications for psych stuff. So.
Exactly, so many applications, and I think it ties in very well with my work in disability in trying to create or work with these kids to find the best solution for them in helping them regulate emotion and navigate the world as best that they can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about disability support work and the education system and the bright future that's happening in that space, and for yourself. I think there's way less doom and gloom in this talk than there has been in my others. There's so much good change happening in this space, and I just hope that we can
there's a lot of exciting changes.
And you defined things for me so greatly, like the value of art and just how education is changing, and the impact that we can have on students in the disability community. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me, and I'll have to have you on in a few years when you're further down the track in your little journey. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.